I'm Ron Gallagher at Maximum Velocity Physical Therapy, and you're listening to HYPERSPEED Radio. You don't have to live in pain, whether you're running, swimming, playing a team sport, or just everyday fitness. We bridge a gap between medicine and strength and conditioning to help you break through at MVPT. What's up, everybody? This is HYPERSPEED Radio. I am Ron Gallagher at Maximum Velocity Physical Therapy here in blustery, freezing Las Vegas today. Can't even believe I'm saying that because my guest is from Denver, and he's like, "What are you talking about? This is cold." But today, I bet it's colder here than it is in Denver. What do you think, Travis?
Oh, 100%.
It's got to be just like 10 degrees colder here today than Colorado.
We got winds.
It's crazy. And Vegas doesn't know what to do with themselves because just a few days ago, it was 90 degrees. Oh. But I am super excited for today's show. I know like every host of every show ever says that, but today is easily the biggest guest in HYPERSPEED Radio history. So super excited. Let's share the screen with Bob, but I'm going to introduce Bob. I have Bob Seebohar here, registered dietitian from Energy Performance in Denver. In my opinion, in most opinions, the top endurance nutritionist, sports nutritionist around. So I'm pretty stoked to have Bob on the show. What's up, Bob?
Ron, that is such a kind intro. I totally appreciate it.
I haven't even got to the intro yet. Those of you who are around Maximum Velocity are very aware of metabolic efficiency and the work that Bob has done, but I want to give a thorough, more appropriate intro. I've been doing some research, so I stole a couple of paragraphs and kind of piece some things together. Bob Seebohar is a board-certified specialist in sports dietetics, the former director of sports nutrition for the University of Florida, served as the sport dietitian for the U.S. Olympic Committee. He was in Beijing in the 2008 Olympics as the triathlon Olympic exercise physiologist and sports dietitianist. He owns Energy Performance in Denver, worked with a couple of University of Denver teams, exercise physiologist, certified strength and conditioning specialist, high performance endurance coach, which is not an easy designation to get. He has created the concepts of nutrition periodization, metabolic efficiency, which we're going to get into in depth. And he has written a handful of books on the subject. My personal favorite is the youth book, which I think we'll probably get into. I probably have asked parents to buy that maybe 20-ish times. So lots and lots of miles out of that book. He has his hands in a couple of different things. One is he's created some food companies to go along with his metabolic efficiency concept, Barada Foods, all-around snack company. And his latest creation is Inside Sports Nutrition podcast with the great Dina Griffith, another RD who seems like you guys have gone back a lot of years. But that's Bob Seebohar in a nutshell. How's it going, Bob?
Now that was a great introduction. Thank you. Yeah,
you're welcome. I want my audience to know who I'm talking to. I wouldn't even say that you're the endurance guy, although you are the endurance guy. You're probably all around the nutrition guy. So I pretty much run all my nutrition information through Bob's filters as best I can.
Thank you. I've definitely been around the block. We call it, you get to a certain point in your career and your life, and you can afford to say, I've been there, done that, continue to do that.
Yes. I think in all things endurance, you have definitely done that. I want to share a personal story with how I came to find Bob and what Bob has done for me. I was really, really struggling as a triathlete with trying to drop some weight. All I could think about was this strength to weight ratio on the bike, and I couldn't go any faster on the bike because I just flat out was too heavy. And Bob presented at UNLV a weight loss for triathletes course, like a seminar, and I thought that was an interesting title from the very beginning. And then as he began to speak, it was super evident he was right on the money, because I had been to several other general RDs, and I don't want to take away anything from them. It was just the traditional American diet of what we're supposed to do as athletes, and I was miserable. I went like an entire year without a cheat meal, pretty much, because I was so focused and so driven to drop some weight. And then as soon as I jumped onto a metabolic efficient style of eating, I immediately dropped 30 pounds and was performing the best I had performed in my triathlon time. I also figured out I was allergic to gluten in that time based on some of the stuff that I had learned from Bob. I was so interested in learning more of that I went to Denver and was a metabolic efficiency training specialist, and didn't know if I should even be in the room because I wasn't the only. I was the only non-food person in the room, and I wasn't sure if that's like what he wanted, but I was coaching so many triathletes and runners at the time that, I wanted to be able to extend that same amount of information to them. And I can't tell you, 50 to 100 people in my career, have had major, amazing things happen based on learning how to be more metabolically efficient and essentially kicking the metabolic syndrome, and just have generally made tons and tons of people healthier. Not just that, but when I coached the HYPERSPEED triathlon team, which, I tried to keep this brand going, which is why I called the podcast HYPERSPEED. But, we at one point I had 19 kids. We ended up with around 10 kids who wanted to be elite. We raced against the energy performance team, and we were always just a little short. Chasing those red kids around. And it was really great to see you out there and watch you run around, and we got to chat a little bit here and there, the race meetings and all that stuff. So it was really great to see you in action. I know you're an endurance athlete, really long history of coaching endurance athletes. So it just means a lot to me that you're here. And I think the things you have to show are really great for all of our audiences, but I'm happy to share the metabolic efficient concept with the HYPERSPEED audience.
Thank you. I mean, it's great seeing kind of full circle things come around, and it's always fun, engaging in young athletes. I always tell my adult athletes I work with, if I could have just gotten them when they were younger, right? Because with young athletes, we teach them; with older athletes, we fix them, right? And that's kind of my strategy when it comes to nutrition, because as we get older, we kind of get set in our ways. We try these different things. Some work, some don't. But man, with kids and young athletes, it's like they're just like sponges for information.
Right. And you had a great group. I mean, my kids would always talk about how your kids out there would be, courteous and, competitive, but like nice and, decent humans out there. In some of those packs, it can get kind of heated, and some true colors of some of these athletes come out, and we always had such a high level of respect. And I would always say, do you think Bob's group's off today? They're probably working today. You think Bob's not gonna have his team ride hard today? It's windy. Yeah. We got a ride today. Bob's so try to dangle that carrot out there, because we're always chasing you. So
yeah, well, I appreciate that. I think from as you mentioned, I've been coaching athletes for quite a while, young athletes and older athletes too. And, with my junior team, I always like to really portray the, respect, the gratitude, and, competition was almost second to that because, they're young individuals. Like
Right.
I wanted to
Right.
teach them. And, my favorite moments, and maybe not their favorite moments because they just wanted to train, right? But my favorite moments were giving them life lessons. Like, how do we incorporate triathlon training into life lessons? So when they get older,
Right.
if you haven't had this yet, like a lot of them will come back and they'll thank you, be like,
Oh,
hey, thank you
absolutely.
so much for that. Yeah.
Yeah. So Hyperspeed put 3 in college triathlon. And
Yep. Nice.
I just posted a picture a couple weeks ago with all 3 of them at one race in 3 different kits.
Oh, I
And
love it. I love it.
my heart was, just swollen.
Yes. Yes. That's a good feeling, isn't
Yeah,
it?
super cool. Super cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, let's dive in. This is the title of today's show is going to be Nutrition for the Endurance Athlete, just because I'm trying to capture these folks. But really, I believe this is the healthiest form of eating. We just happen to be endurance athlete oriented. So I'm going to do my best today to get out of your way and make sure that I'm independent in all this, but I just love all the things that you do. So why don't we start off with, why don't you explain what is the concept of metabolic efficiency?
Yep. That's a great place to start. So, as a sport dietitian, registered dietitian for over 20 years, it's funny. I look back at my career. I'm like, why did I even create this concept? Why did I create the nutrition periodization concept? And I think it was out of frustration, to be honest with you, Ron. And, my story with metabolic efficiency training is I was actually, and this is in the early 2000s, just to let you know how long ago this was stemming and when I created this. But I wanted to try to fix the problem, right? Because I think as males, we try to fix problems, right? I wanted to fix the problem of GI distress, so digestive distress for endurance athletes. Unfortunately, I was in that endurance athlete that had been bitten by the digestive, distress bug, the GI distress monster, I call it. I grew up as a competitive soccer player, moved into endurance and in sports triathlon in college. So I never really had any digestive issues growing up until I introduced myself to triathlon. And that's when I found I started getting digestive distress. Then I became a registered dietitian. I focused solely on sport nutrition for endurance athletes early in my career. And the more endurance athletes I worked with, the more were coming to me saying the same exact thing. Like, I have digestive distress during the bike, during the run, like you name it. And I was kind of scratching my head, like, why is this happening? Right. So I was asking a lot of my mentors back then, and, why is this happening? What's going on? And, the answer I mostly received was, well, if you're an endurance athlete, that's just par for course. Like, you have to get used to throwing up and having diarrhea and just all these bad things digestively. And, I guess it was me saying, it's not cool. Like, if you're bit by that GI distress monster, one, it's not a good feeling, trying to look for porta potties everywhere, carrying stuff with you in case you have a emergency bathroom break. So I basically said, no, I'm not comfortable with that. I need to fix this. I need to find a way. That, honestly, Ron, that's how metabolic efficiency training was created, and that's why it was created. And that lasted for about 6 to 12 months. And then I started realizing all of these ancillary benefits. So
Right.
now we have improved health markers. We have improved, metabolic syndrome or in disease, not preventing, but reducing the risk of disease state, blood lipids, cholesterol. And then I'm seeing body weight changes and body composition, like things I never would have dreamed of happening
Right.
because I was only looking at one specific part of the body. But that's when metabolic efficiency training kind of blew up in my mind. And this was mid 2000s. So we're talking, 15, 16 years ago, give or take a few years. And it's been a ride. Like, there's not a day that passes that an athlete or a coach comes up to me and says, hey, the impact that we're making on my athletes, myself, just because we're following a non-diet approach, like we're literally just using food to balance blood sugar better,
Right.
that has enormous effects on the body physically, but also mentally. So that's kind of the backstory of metabolic efficiency training.
Awesome. And so how it's easy to say, oh, you're having GI distress, you should maybe think about metabolic efficiency. But in reality, it's much bigger than that. So it's not just the athletes who experience GI distress in the middle of an event. It's talk about what athletes should be metabolic efficient.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. I would say every single athlete,
right?
It doesn't matter the age, the sport, the competitiveness.
Right.
And Ron, like I've been blessed to be able to work with kids, to work with Olympic medalists, right? And what I found
and
is
one thing that I didn't mention, and sorry to interrupt, is the laundry list of professional triathletes, professional athletes in general that you've worked with is enormous. So it's kids, regular folks, all the way to ultra competitive, Olympic caliber, high level folks. So everybody in between. So to me, that means human body.
Exactly.
So anybody with a human body.
Right. Yeah. And the great thing about that, because I think we get enamored with these professionals, right? Because everyone wants to maybe be a little bit like him or her, right? But I think the important piece of this puzzle in response to your question is that even these Olympians are implementing some degree of metabolic efficiency training. They may not use the same term, but they still do it. Like you see the Tour de France guys doing it, but they're just not using that term.
Right.
So the point is, like, everybody should be applying this, because here's the thing. I specifically created this with a non-diet approach, right? I don't believe in diets. I don't believe in calorie counting. I don't believe in cheat meals, cheat days, cheat anything. Like, I get a little sensitive to that because of my training as a dietitian and behind the behavioral side of things. So literally everybody should be doing this. But here's the thing. With metabolic efficiency training, because there's some different strategies of using food to support blood sugar, there will be times where you periodize your nutrients. So your carbs, protein, and fat, those are going to go up and down based on health goals, based on training cycle, based on the age. Like if we talk about kids, based on their developmental stage and age. Even masters athletes these days, we have a lot better research these days in terms of macronutrient intake for the aging athlete and even for the female athlete. So the beauty is we use metabolic efficiency training, optimize blood sugar through food, non-diet approach, and then we increase or decrease the macros based on that person. And that's the beauty of this, because there's no more dieting. There's no, you can just break those diet handcuffs finally.
Right. So if we explain that just a little bit plainer, let's say we're talking about a half iron. Let's say we're talking about somebody who's training for 50K. Mm-hmm. In the very first, say, quarter to a third of their training cycle, the metabolic demands, the food demands are different because the mileage and the training are different. And then as the training cycle moves closer and closer to race day, so does the intensity, so does the volume, so does the demand of nutrients on the body. So you modify the macronutrients to match that. And I don't think that there's enough athletes who understand that concept, because they eat this way and they train this way.
Yes. And
those swings get our blood sugar, get our performance off, and we don't necessarily put that together. So that to me is what the concept of periodization of nutrients is.
Yep.
So really what we're trying to do is control blood sugar. Let's talk to me about the importance of controlling blood sugar.
Yeah. And for the listeners really quick, and for the viewers, like what you said should really trigger something, because I still continue to see this, and I'll talk and then I'll answer your question about blood sugar. But if an athlete starts gaining weight when they start training for an event, that's not normal. Okay. If we're talking about an endurance athlete, that is not normal. So, your traditional marathoner, Ironman athlete, whatever, they're like, yeah, I just started training. I'm feeling great. Why did I gain 5 pounds? Why did I gain 10 pounds? Like that, let's just say that is not normal. That is purely, like you were saying, their eating is here and their training is up and down, and they're not correlating the two, right?
Right.
So one, we need to correlate the two. Like I designed nutrition periodization to literally, it like the definition is nutrition should support your physical training. Like that is as basic as you can get, right?
Right.
So then kind of the next layer is, all right, well, okay, we talk about nutrition, we talk about food, we're talking about macronutrients, carbs, protein, and fat. So why is it so important to control blood sugar? Well, I did a deep dive into the science and research 20 plus years ago. And obviously when I was in school and I did a couple of graduate degrees and I studied metabolism, and I had the fortunate pleasure of really kind of doing this deep dive in school. But then when I was in the real life, it really is about controlling blood sugar. And there's many different reasons, right? It depends on the age, depends on the gender, depends on the sport actually too. But in short, if we can control blood sugar, we can control energy throughout the day, we can control mood, we can control sleep patterns a little bit better. We can certainly affect recovery from training and from exercise. And we can control hormones. And that's really the thing. If we can control blood sugar, and instead of that roller coaster effect of blood sugar going up and down, if we have a more steady blood sugar curve throughout the day, we control a few hormones in the body that actually have an effect on body weight, body composition, energy management throughout the day, and even recovery from training. So kind of at a 30,000 foot view, we're trying to control blood sugar to have a hormonal effect that induces positive influences on the body.
Yeah, that's amazing, because we oftentimes think of it strictly as calories in versus calories out.
Right.
And the calories in versus calories out sometimes puts you in starvation mode,
Totally.
whereas a hormonal approach educates your body that we're safe, everything is fine, the level of stress is acceptable, and
Yes.
you're able to function on a much healthier level.
Yeah.
I know that you get fired up about this particular topic, but everyone says, "Oh, that sounds very keto. That sounds very,
Yes.
that's where everybody goes." And
Yeah.
it's a very distinct difference and nowhere near as quote unquote risky. So
Yeah, absolutely.
how about if we compare metabolic efficient style or lifestyle with some of these diet culture, diet fads?
Yeah. I love that. And I do get a little heated underneath the collar when you say that.
Oh, I've seen you get fired up.
Yeah. Only even like in your trade too, I'm sure physical therapy, like there's so many of these things where you're like, really? Really? Right?
Oh yeah.
So when it comes to, so let me back up. So like I said, I created metabolic efficiency in the early 2000s, right? It's been a long time. The ketogenic diet, while it's been around for eons, it wasn't rising in popularity at that time. Like it was completely off the radar. In fact, even low carb, high fat, which I'll refer to as LCHF, low carb, high fat diets still weren't the thing yet, right? So
Right.
I will say when I created metabolic efficiency training, there was no spoken word of keto, no spoken word of LCHF. Really, all we were really doing in the endurance sport nutrition world was kind of battling that whole high carb, low fat, regimen, right? So
Right.
I will say this, what came, chicken before the egg kind of a thing, or egg before the chicken. It's the whole what came first, right? And in metabolic efficiency, while it didn't come first before keto, it is extremely different because my mind wasn't even on sacrificing calories, low carb, high fat. Like
Right.
all I was trying to do was create a system that could use food and for athletes to get away from counting calories, to use real food, whole foods, to induce a positive blood sugar response. That was literally what I was trying to do. So what we see is not a lot of deprivation, not a lot of elimination in metabolic efficiency training, unless there's an allergy or intolerance, like you mentioned, even with your gluten, right? Of course, we sometimes find that. But the main difference is like ketogenic, that is typically a very elimination diet. It's a ketogenic diet and a very, very low carbs, very high fat, actually usually where you're following lower protein too. I am not an advocate for ketogenic diets for endurance athletes. I think it has some interesting clinical implications in disease states, which we're seeing a lot of the research. But I'm not a fan for that. Not fan of that. One, in young athletes, two, in older athletes, female athletes, male athletes, if you can tell. So that ketogenic diet is so elimination based and so just not have it has structure, but it doesn't have the success markers because athletes cannot implement that long term. It's very, very difficult, right? So then we move to the next stage up, and that's the LCHF, the low carb, high fat. So interestingly, there is no definition of low carb, high fat. Like if you're eating, I don't know, 300 grams of carbohydrates per day, like today maybe, and then tomorrow you're down to 200, maybe that is lower carb, that it is lower carb, but maybe is it a low carb, high fat? We just don't know, right? There's not a lot of data on the actual description of that. So low carb, high fat gives a little more wiggle room because you don't have to drop the carbs as really as low as you need to with the ketogenic diet. However, anything you put with a diet in it, it's not going to be sustainable. So it's so funny. And I'm sure you've talked to athletes too, Ron, where, I get athletes all the time. They're like, oh, I'm following low carb, high fat. And, they're so excited like the first 4 to 8 weeks. And maybe they see some great results because their body weight is reducing, which is usually mostly water in the first half of that time, by the way, off the side. But they can't sustain it, right? After a couple months, they're like, oh, I had these cheat meals, these cheat whatever days, and I'm eating this, I'm eating that. I'm like, well, you probably shouldn't have you probably should have just started with not following a diet. And that's the main difference between metabolic efficiency training and all these diets. Now, I'm going to say that metabolic efficiency, you do periodize the macronutrients, right? So you're going to increase or decrease carbs, increase or decrease protein, increase or decrease fat based on your health needs and your health goals, but also based on your performance needs and your performance goals. So is it LCHF? No. Will you be reducing or increasing carbs, protein, and fat at certain times following metabolic efficiency training? Yes, absolutely, because you have to cycle your nutrition to support your training and your health goals. And I think it's important for everyone to realize that we do need to focus on health first, not performance first, right? If you're not healthy, you cannot perform.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I talk a lot about how your race nutrition is a reflection of your weekly nutrition, which is based on your ability to tolerate stress.
Absolutely.
So if your body is in an unhealthy place and you're not tolerating stress well, then your big race is going to have a big issue because you're more than likely not tolerating stress very well.
Exactly. Yep. And that's a whole nother ball of wax, that you can kind of start to unfold a little bit. Is like now you have the stress, and like I don't know. I'm just going to implement this or really quick. Is I think more adults should have a lot. I call it popping the hood, but I think they should have a lot more testing done on themselves.
Yes.
Even if it's blood work or cortisol or metabolic efficiency testing, whatever, because the more we can understand our bodies, the more we can feed it, the more we can introduce different maybe relaxation strategies or whatever. But I am finding, like literally in my practice, Ron, I'm finding all these athletes are simply messed up when it comes to different hormones, blood lipids, stress hormones specifically. And we only find that when we can actually have them go get that testing done. And that's a crucial piece of this puzzle, especially I'm going to throw it out there. I'm going to play the age card, but especially as we age, like once we get into our 30s, 40s, especially, things start to happen. And we've always been told, hey, when you're 40, it's not like you're 20 anymore. And you may feel like you're 20, but inside things are going on a little bit differently. And we need to respond to that.
And that energy, what does that look like? So if you're going to do, if an athlete walks in your office looking for some guidance, what kind of testing are we talking about?
Well, I'm very biased with the metabolic efficiency testing. Obviously, I created the concept. I created the physiological test because that to me is like the lowest hanging fruit. Like if you want to understand healthy aging, and especially if you're an endurance athlete trying to figure out this puzzle of how the heck do I fuel myself, right? But also maybe there's some weight loss, maybe there's some body composition changes. That's probably the lowest hanging test, because literally you're on the bike, you're on the treadmill, whatever it is, or maybe both, not at the same time. And we're looking at how efficient your body is actually using its stored carbohydrates and its stored fat. Like once I know that, I can actually design a nutrition plan that supports their physiology, but also their health and performance goals. So that's probably first and foremost. Like you walk in the door, we're going to schedule that test, right? Then we get into more specialized tests. So then it's based on what the athlete is really presenting with. So lack of energy, maybe, predetermined medical health habits, or maybe there's some genetic things, medical health history. So then we might need to poke around to do some blood work. We might need to do some hormone testing, might need to do a little bit more conducive testing to their specific needs based on where they're at. But overall, I think metabolic efficiency testing is first and foremost, because we understand, and think about this, we didn't really explain this, but based on your daily nutrition plan, and that's the carbs, the protein, the fat that you're putting in your body, you can manipulate your body's ability to burn fat and store carbohydrates, right? So that's the concept of metabolic efficiency training, is how do we eat better, control our blood sugar to turn on our fat burning more and preserve our carbohydrates. And let me just jump into this. Why the heck is that important? Well, we have tens of thousands of calories stored as fat in our body. Even the leanest of the lean. Like you look at these pro triathlon guys and girls, they're super, super lean, but they still probably have 30, 40, 50,000 calories stored as fat in their body. Now, us normal people, we probably have 80,000, 90,000. So here's the thing. We have a ton of fat stored in our body. Sometimes we can't see it because it's intra-abdominal and it's intramuscular. We don't have that many carbohydrates stored. So, it depends actually if you're a smaller female or a larger male, but normally you're seeing maybe about 1,400, maybe 1,200 calories of stored carbohydrate, all the way up to 2,000 calories. So There's a huge mismatch of energy storage in our body. The concept of metabolic efficiency training is trying to teach the body to tap into those fat stores, right? So we can utilize more energy from fat while we're preserving carbohydrate. It's not keto. It's not low carb, high fat. We're actually trying to preserve carbohydrates, because in the endurance athlete model, at some point during our race, the intensity is going to be high enough to where we need to use those carbohydrates, right? We want to make sure that our carbohydrate gas tank is pretty high. So when we need to use those stores, we're ready to use them, right? But here's the interesting point too. We can, and this is what I see with athletes coming in for testing with me, their daily nutrition plan is actually supporting this strategy. They're burning more carbs and storing more fat. And after usually we do the testing, we sit down, we switch around their daily nutrition plan to support burning more fat and storing more carbs. So you can actually, a lot of athletes don't realize, you can teach the body either way. And it kind of depends on what you want to do within the body.
Right. I mean, the human body is amazing. And,
it is.
It's like over time, if you teach it, to be more predominantly sugar, less fat, and then you ramp up stress, now your body's going to go to the place it already goes.
Exactly.
So your concept is daily reversing what's on your plate, so that when the energy comes, or when the stress comes, your body needs to use the appropriate fuel.
Exactly.
So what does a typical, it's different for a lot of people, but what would you say is a typical plate for what a metabolic efficient meal should look like, say Monday to Wednesday?
Yeah. That's a tricky one, Ron, because a lot of this is based on how the training is set up, right? So the first thing I look at an athlete is I say, okay, show me, tell me what your training is. So literally I break down Monday through Sunday and we go through okay, I'm swimming here and it's maybe an easy aerobic swim. Oh, I've got a track session tomorrow. It's a hard track session, right? So once you understand the energy demands, you actually have to feed the energy demands, right? Also, we need to keep in mind health, obviously, right? But based on that, so it's really difficult to say, okay, here's what you should be eating during the week or versus the weekend. I will say this, if you can allow me to do this, I teach metabolic efficiency relative to the carbohydrate to protein ratio. And if I can explain this really quick, when I started to create this concept, I wanted to get away from calorie counting, from gram counting, right? During the day, right? Doing daily nutrition, breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks. So I tried to find a method that was very qualitative, very subjective, did a whole bunch of research. I landed in the diabetic research quite a bit because obviously we know people with diabetes need to control their blood sugar like crazy. So I actually took a lot of that knowledge and I formulated more of it in an athletic model. And so here's what we know. Carbohydrates and protein, the way these two nutrients interact with blood sugar are hugely important. Fat is also important, but fat is usually in protein sources if an athlete is not vegan or vegetarian, or I would just say vegan, right? So basically, if an athlete is an omnivore, they include animal proteins, they usually are going to get enough fat in their daily nutrition plan to support all their health needs and blood sugar needs, right? So it's the special cases like the vegan specifically that we need to nitpick a little bit more. But that said, I need to get that out of the way. We look at the carbohydrate to protein ratio, and here's what we know. And I'm not going to use numbers, and I'll tell you why here in a second. But we know, and I'm going to put it actually in I call it the hand model, right? So we look at the size of the hands relative to the volume of food or the ratio of food, right? So carbohydrates, we know, they're great foods, right? I think everyone is demonizing carbohydrates these days. We need carbohydrates for many different reasons. Unfortunately, because of the whole keto and LCHF movement, again, people are just really demonizing carbohydrates, and it's very concerning to me, right? In short, we know that there are certain ratios that exist with carb to protein, right? A 1-to-1 ratio. So simply one carbohydrate serving to one serving of protein. That ratio optimizes blood sugar. I'll tell you what that means in food in 1 second. Okay. So we know that 1-to-1 ratio, carb to protein, optimizes blood sugar. We also know that 2-to-1, so 2 parts carbohydrate to 1 part protein, still really, really affects the blood sugar in a very positive way. So that 1-to-1, 2-to-1 ratio, those are ratios that are really great for stabilizing blood sugar. Once we hit 3-to-1, so 3 parts carbohydrate to 1 part protein, then it's kind of a bumpy road. It's not horrible blood sugar control yet, but we're starting to get there, okay? That is what I need to kind of let listeners and viewers know is once we get over that 3-to-1, so that 4-to-1 ratio, 4 carbs to 1 protein, that is the destruction of blood sugar, right? So if we look at it in this model, we're looking at optimization of blood sugar, 1-to-1 carb to protein ratio or a 2-to-1. We're looking at a 3-to-1 ratio as the maybe we need to get carbohydrates back in our bodies, specifically our muscles, pretty quickly. That's where that 3-to-1 comes into play really, really well, right? That's like a chocolate milk, if you will, like if we put it into food, right? So I will say this, I am kind of circling back to your question here. That 1-to-1 ratio.
Great stuff. Great stuff.
Yeah. That 1-to-1 ratio, carb to protein, I'm going to say this, and I go on record many, many times saying this. It is extremely difficult to do for most athletes because they're not used to controlling their blood sugar so tightly. So as an example, if you're going to have a piece of chicken and let's say some broccoli, right? So chicken is your protein. In my model, you would have a whole handful of protein, like the entire hand, right? Wrist to fingertips. That would be the size of your chicken. Now, the other hand is broccoli. That's carbohydrates, right? So you would literally grab as much broccoli as you could grab in one hand, and that's your 1-to-1 ratio of carb to protein, okay? It's very difficult to do. because you don't consume a lot of carbohydrates. So here's where the periodization comes into play. I usually don't recommend 1-to-1 ratio unless it's early in the training phase, early in the training cycle, or maybe during off season, right? As you were saying earlier, Ron, as training starts to increase, we know we need to find more carbohydrates to fuel our bodies and our muscles, but we also need to respect protein at the same time. So that's where that 2-to-1, 3-to-1 come into play. So as an athlete's going from base training, maybe we start with like around a 1-to-1 if they can do that from a behavior change standpoint. Once they start increasing volume and intensity, right, they start adding repeats and sessions in the pool that are a little more difficult, you name it, right? Some bike run workouts. Maybe that's where we look at more of a 2-to-1 ratio because our body needs a little bit more carbohydrates. And then maybe after some really tough workouts, or maybe, triathletes, sometimes we have 2-a-days where we have to really stress our bodies 2 times that day. Maybe there is an opportunity to feed a 3-part carbohydrate to 1 part protein. So again, that's like that chocolate milk. One of my great examples of this is like, if you look at breakfast, you can do like the traditional endurance athlete breakfast where you do oatmeal and fruit basically, right? Or nuts, whatever it is. That's like super high. That's probably, depending on what you put in it, if you're using milk or not, depending on the type of milk, that's probably like a 4-to-1, 5-to-1 carb to protein. Maybe that's not the best breakfast depending on what you're trying to do that day, right? So maybe it's more egg and veggies or eggs and fruit where you can control that ratio a little bit more. So it kind of coming full circle to your plate example, I like to explain it based on the ratios because it allows a little bit more periodization. But I think it also allows viewers and listeners to understand, oh, he's talking about putting different sources, but also different amounts of carbs and protein together at the same feeding. Because remember, again, like I always use this example. I'm going to use this example. If you have a banana in the morning, right, what that's going to do is it's going to spike your blood sugar. You're going to feel good for a few minutes, and then it's going to drop your blood sugar, right? From a hormonal perspective, that is a horrible thing to do because you don't want to go up and down that roller coaster. So you want to add like a spoonful of nut butter with your banana because now the nut butter has protein and the nut butter has fat. When you introduce foods together, these carbs, protein, and fat together, we see a very even blood sugar line versus these high spikes and kind of the peaks and valleys.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, so I was trying to just compare what people normally eat to what an efficient, metabolic efficient plate would look like, but those were perfect examples. So let's say we have the same half iron 50K type person. They've been metabolically efficient now for a good month or two. What is a 4-hour effort look like if you're already metabolically efficient? Because I want the current person who has a 4-hour effort to say, how am I fueling 4 hours, and what is Bob prescribing that would be different?
Exactly. Yep. So here's the beautiful thing about blood sugar, and I didn't mention this yet. In non-disease states, so basically non-diabetic states, your blood sugar will go up and down in it. If we're talking about adults here, right? Let me just qualify that. Adult blood sugar will go up and down about every 3 hours, maybe 3.5 hours, right? So keep that in mind throughout the day. That's usually when your body's saying, oh, I need to eat something, right? So now if you have an effort, if you have a competition or even a training session that is 4 hours long, I look at, okay, what did you do beforehand, right? Because you can do a couple different strategies before like a competition, right? Or even a hard training session. You can load your body with carbohydrates right before the session. And that's what I call old school, right? That's kind of where we came from 20 plus years ago. If you do that, which I'm not going to say it's not beneficial, but we need to understand if you drop a whole bunch of carbs in your body before a session, and it can be any session, to be honest with you, you're teaching your body to burn carbohydrates immediately, which means you're going to be burning through your very limited carbohydrate stores, and you're going to burn that gas off very quickly while you're still storing fat. Now, if that's your goal, so be it. But during a 4-hour session or competition, that should not be your goal, because here's another little secret, right? Basic biochemistry, physiology. We only have about maybe 2 to 2.5 hours worth of carbohydrate stores in our body to fuel exercise. So we only have enough in our carbohydrate gas tank to give us energy for about a 2 to 2.5 hour session. So you're talking about 4 hours. The last thing we want to do is feed a heavy carbohydrate meal or snack right before that 4-hour session or race, because what you've done is effectively turned on your body's ability to burn carbohydrates. So your gas tank, you're going to be running on empty in about 2 to 2.5 hours, right? So contrast that, you want carbohydrates in that pre-feeding, but you also want a little bit of protein and a little bit of fat, because the better you can control your blood sugar, the more you're going to be preserving your carbohydrate during that 4-hour session. Does that make sense so far?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, and the part that I get worried about is, being down the rabbit hole and all the science and all the,
Yep.
So my understanding is deep. I want to be sure that, the average person gets it, because,
absolutely. Yeah.
Because, are you still, hope this isn't putting you on the spot, but are you still doing tons with UCAN?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So,
yeah. I mean, UCAN is the only product that actually supports my concept of metabolic efficiency training.
Right. Can you talk about that? Because, I don't want to name any other names, but some of the competitors to the long effort stuff, the types of sugars that they have can be problematic. And,
Absolutely.
I could talk to 100 ultra runners, because I'm in a big ultra runner group here. So I get a ton of ultra runners. When I mention UCAN, they're like, never heard of it.
Exactly. Exactly.
And, so why is a product like UCAN more towards a metabolically efficient place versus some of the competitors? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, let me first qualify that. Obviously, every athlete's digestive system is very individual. Okay, I needed to get that out of the way, because I've seen some ultra runners and some athletes of all ages, what they eat during like a race, a trainings, whatever. I'm sometimes shocked. I'm like, how can you even think about digesting that?
Right.
So
it's a buffet.
we've got, if we think of like a bell-shaped curve, we do have some outliers. So let's, the outliers are going to stay outliers. All of us other, a normal digestive system individuals kind of fall into the bell-shaped curve, right? So we have a lot of different, if we're talking about training nutrition, right? We have a lot of these different product companies that for decades and decades, right, have been producing simple sugar-based products, right? And it's glucose, it's fructose, it's maltodextrin. I mean, you name the sugar combinations, they're having them. In individuals and athletes with GI distress problems, a lot of times these simple sugars will actually trigger GI distress. I know personally in my N of 1, they do. I cannot do a lot of simple sugars during, because it triggers GI distress in me. Right. The other fact is that it promotes very kind of short burning fuel, if you will. So when you take gels or gummies or whatever that is simple sugar based, you have to take them very frequently and in higher amounts, right? And that can be very problematic, especially if you're carrying your calories.
Those
right?
are the maltodextrin and the sucrose and
exactly.
all those.
Exactly, which is found in probably 98, maybe 99% of all sport nutrition products.
I mean, if you ask an ultra runner, what's the main ingredient? What's the sugar are you talking about?
Right.
They're like, what?
Yeah.
I don't even know.
Exactly. And there's nothing fancy. I love this, because, people are like, Bob, you should do a sport nutrition product. I'm like, no, because all people do is they just play on the same sugar and they add different flavorings and different amounts of salt. And I'm like, nothing new is being done until you can, like, when you can.
You can put your face on it.
Exactly. Exactly. That's true, right? I don't know if I want that.
I want the one with Bob's face on it.
Yeah.
So
then you would know, right? So this is where UCAN comes in, right? So they've been around, I think it's been 16, 17 years now. And they've got a great backstory, which I won't get into, but they weren't really planning on getting in the sport nutrition world. They actually they located me, and, that we had some discussions and so on and so forth. But let's just fast forward to the point that UCAN actually is not a simple sugar-based product. And this is why it works very well with my metabolic efficiency training concept and philosophy, is because it actually controls blood sugar, right? So it is a carbohydrate, but they use a proprietary, a patented starch called super starch, and literally they use a non-GMO corn. They cook it, so they heat it and they use water. They basically cook it. It changes the molecular structure to become this what they call super starch. So what that means is it empties your stomach very quickly, which is awesome for endurance athletes. So there's no problems down there. But then it actually absorbs through the small intestine very slowly. So that's the whole slow energy that you get from that, or a longer energy burn, if you will. So it doesn't empty quick and absorb quick like a lot of simple sugars do, which can actually cause GI distress at times. Because it empties quickly out of your stomach and absorbs pretty slow throughout or in the small intestine, it gives you steady energy. And that's why endurance athletes love it, because number one, you don't have to consume as much of it. You don't have to dose as frequently. I mean, I'm dosing every 60 to 90 minutes with athletes using UCAN instead of the traditional, 15 to 30 minutes with simple sugars. And, it's not giving you spikes. So it literally is like that really great bridge of using a product that will sustain blood sugar, but will also sustain energy. So especially when you're talking long course, anything over 3-4 hours, this is like the ideal sport nutrition product.
Right. Prevents those roller coasters.
Exactly.
Well, I could talk to you about this all day. I think this is an amazing topic. You are really, really good at helping these folks get through some of this stuff. If my first recommendation is for folks to go to the Metabolic Efficient book. This is the concept. If you like the concept, then pick up the Nutrition Periodization book, which is technically, like if it was chronological, it would be first.
Exactly.
But learn about the concept, buy into the concept, and then periodize it. And then those two things together, I think that's a strategy for winning. So you have a handful of books that folks could buy. There's even a kid's book that's, to your credit, not super fat, sugar like oriented. It's just really great, sound, anti-American diet culture, nutrition information that's based on science. It's based on experience. It's just gives parents such a great resource. So, and then you have some food companies that are pushing, good snacks, good pre-race snacks. And then again, the podcast with Dina, Inside Sports Nutrition. So can't let you go without plugging that, because I listened to 4 or 5 of those in preparation for this, and it just brings back all the memories of sitting in your class and learning all this stuff. And I mean, to me, it's the top of the food chain. No pun intended.
Yeah, that's great.
Do you have anything else you want to add on metabolic efficiency? Something you wanted to say that you didn't get to say?
I would just reiterate and kind of reaffirm that metabolic efficiency is not a diet. It should be easy and lifelong, right? And that's really, if you can just kind of again get the diet culture out of your mind and focus on, how do I control blood sugar through putting different carbs, protein, and fat together? I think that's my ending message. I just love using food as fuel, obviously, but really to control blood sugar should be the primary goal for every individual from young to old.
Awesome. I have a reoccurring part of my show. My clinic is always good music playing, and everybody gets sort of excited about music. And I always ask my guests what are you listening to these days? Like if you got a long run, what's in your ears?
To be honest with you, here's a fun tip about Bob. When I do anything long, I like to be on trails as much as possible.
Yeah.
I don't listen to anything except my own thoughts.
Quiet. So what about in the car?
Yeah, so I'm a classic rock guy. Like I
Okay.
love classic rock. Like you talk about Zeppelin, you talk about the Eagles. I mean,
Okay.
anything classic rock. I
So
mean, we grew up in that, right?
are
So
are
yeah.
you are you aware that Spotify is now calling classic rock what happened in the 90s and
Oh,
2000s?
no way. No
Yes.
way.
Yes. So
Oh.
when you say classic rock, I'm like, I'm not sure Bob knows that 70s, that's what we would consider to be classic rock.
That's
That's not
right.
classic rock anymore. They're
What are
calling
they
that
calling it?
they're
Like
calling
over the
that
hill rock?
no, they're calling it vinyl. Vinyl
Oh
rock.
my, I love it. I
It
love
broke
it.
my heart. I don't know if you watch or listen to Spotify, but every
Yeah.
year Spotify gives you your year in music.
Right,
Well,
right.
it said today your top genre was classic rock, and I was like, wait a second. I don't remember listening to the Zeppelins and
Right.
all the my dad's stuff in the 70s. It was like, wait a
Yeah.
second, all the things I grew up with, like Nirvana and
Right.
Pearl Jam and
Yeah.
Audio Slave and all those guys, they consider
Yeah.
that now classic rock.
Oh my goodness. How times change,
Oh
huh?
my gosh, you might as well punch me in the face. So I did everything I can do to get off of those bands so that when my next year's data comes out, that I don't have classic rock as my top
Yes.
genre.
Yeah. That's probably a good thing for sure. I can't believe that, man.
Yeah, it was upsetting, to say
Yeah,
the
for
least.
sure. Oh,
Well, Jack White, I'm listening to Jack White. He just came out with a new album.
yeah.
If you're a White Stripes guy or any fan of Jack White, the new album
Yeah.
is amazing. So check it out.
Awesome. Awesome. Awesome.
Well, anyway, thanks for coming, Bob. I know we had a little schedule snafu, so I'm glad we worked it out. I think
Yes.
my audience needs to hear more from Bob. So thanks for coming by. Appreciate your time.
Oh, it's my pleasure, man. It's been great catching up with you.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah.
But you can catch Bob Seebohar. He's in Denver, but they do all kinds of evaluations and such, help people get back on track, get their health and performance back on track. He's got a bunch of people around him that are all amazing, and I just think the world of it. So appreciate all you do and appreciate all you've contributed to the sport of triathlon and endurance, because I think this is the top way to be healthy and do these sports.
Well, I tend to agree with you. I'm very biased, but of course I do.
Yeah, I guess since I'm on the Bob train, I'm biased too.
Yeah.
Well, awesome.
Exactly.
Thanks for coming by, Bob. That's all for today on Hyperspeed Radio. Trav, get that claw in there. That's all for today, people.